Hello, my name is Dr. Carl Candlepun, and this is the 10th official episode of my Lost podcast. As such, it features spoilers for up to and including Season 1, Episode 10, Raised by Another. It features no spoilers beyond this point in the show. However, if you have not seen at least to this point in the series, I highly encourage you to do so first before proceeding with this podcast. But without further ado, let's begin. Hello and welcome to Dr. Candlepun's Lost podcast. My name's Christopher Huth, otherwise known as Dr. Candlepun.
And I'm Mike Huth, also known as physical therapist Flickerson.
And today we are talking about Season 1, Episode 10 of Lost, Raised by Another. I think I want to start with our first ever video message from Ben Ward.
Across the pond, Ben?
Yeah. Your favorite. He actually, so if you remember a couple weeks ago when we were talking about farming for content, and we made the joke, like, where you at, Ben? And so he responded to that on the video, like, oh, I've got you, and then he sent a video in. So
that's awesome.
So Ben actually has 4 questions, one of which I did want to start with. 2 of which I do think I want to address also in this episode, but I think we're going to save those for the end because they're not as specific to this episode. And then his 4th one, I think we're going to save for later in the season because it's kind of related to how familiar we each are with the characters, and I think that it'll be a bit more fun to address that question when we're near the end of the season. So with that in mind, his first question.
Hello, Chris and Mike. This is Ben, otherwise known as Candidate 90, with a few questions for you from across the pond. I don't have any lost memorabilia to put up behind me or whatever to show off. I think I've still got a John Locke bobblehead, but I couldn't find it. I think it's packed away somewhere. So I just wore my most John Locke shirt from the pilot that I could. So just imagine I've shaved my head as well, and I've put a red line there and got a slice of orange in my mouth. First off, I'm aiming to hit your Raised by Another episode. So a couple of questions specific to that episode. First off, just interested how you are feeling about Charlie's energy, how he's coming across to you, especially in relation to Claire, because that really kind of is starting to ramp up in this episode. And I just wonder whether, especially Mike, whether you're getting any kind of weird energy off him, whether you think it's adorable, the way that he and Claire are interacting, or whether you feel that there's anything kind of a bit off about it. For me, I do kind of sometimes feel like Charlie's got a bit of nice guy energy here, like capital N, capital G, nice guy. We've already seen him kind of flirting with Kate, making jokes about her bra size, and kind of running around after Shannon. And it feels like he takes a different tack with Claire, where he's being more protective, and there's kind of ambiguity about his approach and what he is hoping to get out of the relationship. He's talking about, I want to be your friend, I want to protect you, but it's kind of ambiguous as to whether there's any romantic feelings there. My questioning around this is perhaps strengthened by the fact that Dominic Monaghan is still playing the drugs withdrawal, and perhaps we're not seeing him sweating and shaking and with dark circles under his eyes and everything, but I think he's still giving a lot of that kind of nervous, kind of twitchy energy to his performance, and so I think that maybe kind of colours how a viewer might feel about his approach to Claire. So just wondering about how you're both feeling about that at this moment.
Okay, so I have things to say about it, but I'll start with you.
I wanna peel back this onion. Love the question. Thank you so much, Ben. Because as soon as you start talking about it, I'm running through all this stuff that I felt about Charlie, and so see if I can do it justice. First and foremost, wholeheartedly agree. I liked his, even before maybe with the withdrawal started, his kind of his joking, his humor, kind of hiding maybe his pain in his past with his humor. I love that. Always sensed something different when it came to Claire. And I'm gonna go like unfair first. There's this almost creepy quality you could assign to Charlie, and I think it's because of his past, his withdrawal, his rock band kind of image. Mm-hmm. But then I love Ben mentioning the fact that he's different with Claire. The vibe about "I really like you" and everything, it's almost childlike. It reminds me of like the marriages on the playground in second grade. When somebody's being mean to you and you find out it's only because they liked you. Hashtag 70s. But when he does that,
that's what Nadia did with Saeed too, though. If you remember.
Yeah. so yeah,
probably also in the 70s for whatever.
Probably me and Saeed probably in the same grade. So when I look at that, I think that I think he's nailing that, and I like what Ben said as well about him still having maybe not the traditional withdrawal symptoms that you'd expect with the sweating and whatnot, but the kind of the little bit of tweaks and a little bit of nervousness. I love that he picked up on that because he plays that role so well. It's almost like if you're not really into the character, you just forget all about that. And I think we kind of alluded to it too, like, oh man, those withdrawals seem to go away pretty quick. Well, not really, but they've kind of taken a back seat to the character development and his development as it pertains to Claire.
Yeah, so I feel very similar to you, and it's really funny because we actually talked about this in our first time viewer discussion group for Confidence Man, which I think had not quite come out yet when Ben sent this, but we actually talked about Charlie and the way that he had been with Kate and Shannon and how different it was with Claire. And I think what I said in that discussion was, to me, those earlier interactions, he's still on the heroin. He's still in this like, hey, I was in a band, trying to get everybody to recognize him and like him, and it's very much like the band is still part of his identity. Yes. We talked all about that in his episode, that Liam kind of made the band Charlie's identity and then took it away from him. So I think he was very much in that phase. And then with Claire, I think it's much, the way I read it is it's much different. It's much more genuine. It's much more caring. She's not just this hot woman that he's trying to flirt with and be like, oh, I'm famous or any of that. That was something that they mentioned in the group, was like, we think, after these years of him being famous, maybe like he's taking advantage of that. All the girls coming into the dressing room, presumably once he started doing heroin, he was probably giving into those temptations that he was trying to resist before. So yeah, all of that's to say my read on it is that, the earlier stuff was a bit creepier, but it was coming from a very different place. Yeah. And this is genuine. I mean, that said, and we are going to talk about this later in the season when we learn a little bit more about Charlie. I do think that there is, this kind of goes back to our discussion about, there not being such a thing as completely selfless act. I do think that there is an image that Charlie wants to have of himself or have others have of him, in which, I mean, for example, in the episode of his that we have already seen, he doesn't want to be seen as useless. He wants to fulfill some kind of purpose, and I think that probably is a factor in him wanting to take care of her. And so in that regard, there is an element of his self-image, his ego, whatever you want to call it, in there. But again, like, I think he really cares about Claire. I think there is a deeper connection there that is completely genuine. And I mean, maybe part of that is just how I want to see it. Yeah. but yeah.
No, I think another thing that just thinking about the episode that kind of comes back that lends credibility to the fact that it's genuine feelings is most people who've cared for somebody deeply have at least fallen into a spot where they had the ability to believe them or trust them to a fault or defend them to a fault. And in this episode, where there's these accusations that Claire's, she's sleepwalking, she's having some night terrors, and she's trying to convince everybody it's real and this happened to her. And man, Charlie, is defending her honor and her reality, pretty handily in dealing with Jack and the others. So
and when she's not even around for that's a good point. That tells us that he's not putting on some show for her, like trying to woo her in some kind of way. Like she's not around, and he's genuinely sticking up for her and her
honoring the absence, baby. Yeah. That's what it's all about.
Yes, that's a good point. Well, so before moving on to Ben's next question, I feel like we could real quick talk about like Claire kind of shutting him down at first, and I think by the end of the episode that makes sense when you learn that like what happened with her baby daddy and not trusting that Charlie when he says that he wants to do this for her will actually stick around.
Yeah, you're nailing it because she was kind of going back to when and I can't think of that dude's name. I don't think he deserves
Thomas. He didn't deserve it.
He deserved it. Thomas the turd. So I think of Thomas is like he's trying to be the way that Charlie genuinely is. Like he's like, oh, maybe we could do this. Kind of like somebody who thinks they could, have a pet, and then there's like, oh, it needs too much attention. He convinces her, and she was against it. She was just like, no, we can't, no. Yeah. And then he convinces her, he wants to play house. He's going to do all the right things. And then, I didn't even remember this was coming, by the way, from 20 years ago and seeing this, but seeing him come in that, came in with the beer and she's putting up curtains and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Everything falls apart real quick. And so to Claire's point, I think she genuinely, has feelings for Charlie, but she has been put in this place where she has to be so protective and defensive of self that she's almost going to drive him away, when he's doing the subtle schoolyard thing, and she's like, okay, well, you're gonna make it easy on me then, because I'm gonna shut this down.
Well, but like, and that's the thing. Like, I noted watching it this time was like, she doesn't even like aggressively like shut it down. She's just kind of like, look, Charlie, and then that's kind of where his pride does kind of take over. Like he immediately reads that as like, oh, she doesn't like me. Yeah. And he's like, okay, it's cool, I get it. And she's trying to be like, no, Charlie, I wasn't saying, and like, so it's like, it's not so much that she was hesitant because she's hesitant to believe that he'll stick around if he says that, he'll be there for her or whatever.
Thanks a lot, Thomas.
Yeah, but Charlie's the one, instead of like pushing through the hurt of that and actually listening to what she may have said after that, just takes it as rejection and leaves. So I think that's worth noting.
Well, I'll say this about Thomas, and this could send this into a whole different avenue, and it's probably nothing based in reality. I allowed myself to get the vibe in that flashback that Thomas might not have been the father of that child. And there's less evidence for it than there is. And I don't know where I got it, but it just made me believe. I think it was maybe the way he, convinced her, like, we can do this. It almost seemed like a dude that was like doing her a favor than a guy that was in this thing with her. And that's kind of the vibe I got. May not be fair.
Yeah, I mean, I had a different vibe. I had a vibe of like in that moment, he's like, well, I think being with, like, he's imagining the ideal scenario of what he imagines it meaning to have her and to have the baby, and he's not thinking about the realistic work that would be part of that. Clearly. And then a few months down the road, he's like, oh yeah, I don't actually want this, and I'm super stressed out, and I'm gonna look for any excuse in how she comes at me to just walk away. Because at least he doesn't disappear. That's the little tiny bit I can say. But it does feel like he's just waiting for her to like give him any excuse oh, of course you're gonna make it out to be the bad guy. It's like, whatever, I'm done.
Yeah.
and then he walks out. So yeah, it's not really a defense of him, but yeah, it's pretty shitty.
You're a bad man, Thomas.
Now, the other message from a Lost fan that I want to address up top before getting into some other things from my notes, maybe, is once again from RunninReed on Reddit. To start with, he agrees with something I said in my Reddit post where I referred to this episode as a big turning point in season 1. So at first he agrees with me labeling it as such, and then he continues by saying, "By this point, we have been exposed to the mystique of the island and the possibility that it has some kind of healing power. But this may have been the first time that it's been suggested that the Losties may have been brought to the island. This adds a whole new layer to the plot. And of course, the episode introduces the idea that there are others on the island. There were some character moments from Claire that I have gone back and forth on over the years. I questioned at times her decision-making and have struggled with her inconsistency, both on the island and off. However, I feel fairly resolute now that everything she did is exactly what Claire would have done. She was easily influenced by Malkin, changing her mind seemingly every time he told her to do something different. Yes, she hesitated and waffled, but she ultimately went with his counsel, and that's spot on. Claire is young, vulnerable, and completely alone. I found her inconsistent approach to be very consistent with what a person in her situation would have done. In terms of Malkin, I remember being blown away." That's the psychic. "The eeriness of the reveal that he knew is a feeling I still remember experiencing." Okay, so I guess let's start with that first part. RunninReed refers to the idea of them somehow being led to the island, and obviously, yeah, it's implied that that's what happened with the psychic. Any thoughts on that?
Going back to 20 years ago, like I didn't know when I was watching the episode that was going to be revealed. Like it didn't, at no point in there was like, oh yeah, that's right. Then I found myself trying to think forward into how everyone else, kind of ended up on that flight. I came up with nothing, by the way, spoiler alert, but yeah.
Well, you've seen how some of them have, and I mean, sure, there's maybe pieces that could be missing as far as being pushed in certain directions, but I would say this episode suggests that Claire was brought or led to the island. I don't know that as of yet we've had good reason to feel that way about everybody else. Now, somebody like Locke might have a different interpretation of things. Like he seems to, in his flashback episode, he talks about destiny. Yeah, and like, this is my destiny. And in this episode, he talks about how he was in Australia looking for something. And he says this to Hurley, and Hurley's like, "Oh, did you find it?" And he's like, "No, it found me." And he looks up around the island. So I mean, he probably does interpret it as destiny or fate or whatever you want to call it, or maybe the island itself brought him here. So in that way, I guess it has been it is starting to be insinuated that might be something, that might be a way to look at things. Yeah. So I guess moving on to the Claire's motivations and going back and forth on her decision making.
As soon as I'm hearing this question, it's like, it's hitting me like, oh yeah, absolutely, and that makes perfectly good sense. How you could sit there and be like, well, man, she doesn't know what she wants, and she's waffling and all this stuff, but it's like he nails it. Easily manipulated because she's vulnerable, and also kind of adding to the strangeness or the stretched out factor there is the phone calls in the middle of the night. They don't show like 20 times that he's contacted her, but the one time she answers the phone in the middle of the night, you get this feeling like this dude's been all over this. Like, he's not leaving her alone. So yeah, found that fascinating, wearing her down.
Well, so the funny thing to me is, and I haven't thought about it too deeply before, but kind of running through it now after reading that, I don't think that I felt like she was like, she doesn't think that they can raise the baby. Thomas talks her into it. She wants to believe that he means what he's saying. She clearly cares for him, if not loves him, and she wants to believe what he's saying. Like, oh yeah, we're gonna be a happy family and it's gonna be great. Then he fucking waffles and changes his mind and runs out on her. And then it's like, well, okay, I can't raise this baby by myself, so I'm gonna give it up for adoption. We don't see her make that decision we don't see the moment she makes that decision, but when she goes to the psychic the next time, she tells him that's what she's going to do. And he's like being all freaky and weird about it, telling her like, no, you need to not do that. But she's like, no, I cannot raise it by myself. I'm meeting with the adoption people. Even all these months later, when he's still been calling her, she's still doing it. It's not until she goes to the agency and she has that incident with the pins, which I want to talk more about in a minute. Then that's where the part of her that is reluctant to give up the baby, or I think there's a part of her that wants to believe. I think she does not think she's capable of giving this baby a happy, healthy life. But I think there's a part of her that isn't excited or thrilled about the idea of having to give it up.
Sure.
So I think Malkin, I don't even think you have to be psychic to make this prediction, but when he says on the phone that, like, I know there's a part of you that doesn't want to do this. Yeah, you could be a fraudulent psychic and say that. It probably hit it on the head. And so I think when what happens at the lawyer's office, when that happens, I think that she takes that, she reads that the way that part of her wants to read it, and is like, okay, let me go hear out what the psychic says. Maybe there is a way for me to raise this baby. And so then she goes and hears him out, and then he's telling her like, oh well, yeah, it's all right if you give it to these people. And then she's kind of surprised because she kind of, this is my read on it, by the way. None of this is explicitly said, but like my read on it is she takes that as a sign. Maybe I am supposed to raise this baby. She goes to him. What's your plan? Now he's telling her, oh yeah, you can give it up just to these specific people. And she's almost disappointed. She's like, you've been telling me all the time I need to raise it. Now you're telling me.
I'm just coming around.
Now you're telling me to give it away to these strangers. Oh, they're not strangers. And it's like, all right. And then so she gets on the plane. So all of that's to say, like the entire train of thought there of her over those months makes sense to me, and I don't really read it as her going back and forth. I think she's pretty resolute for a lot of that, and I think when she does change her mind, that makes sense in the moment for her as a character and the weird circumstances that she's finding herself in.
Well, I find a couple of things interesting that I've just thought of because of you said that. First and foremost, it's kind of interesting that he pushed so hard that she has to be the one. She's the only one that can protect this baby. But then he tries to get her to adopt this couple. So from a psychic standpoint, was there a plan B? If there wasn't a plan B, is it really only important that baby end up on the island and it's not so much about Claire?
Well, no. So I'm going to clarify something that I think you're either forgetting or maybe you missed. That you missed in what Charlie was saying at the end. She understands in that moment with the psychic's doing that. She's understanding it as like, yeah, he's had this weird like, oh well, actually it's fine. What Charlie says is like, or not, like there wasn't actually a couple in Los Angeles. Like you weren't listening to him before about raising it yourself, so he made up this other couple, thinking that you'd go along with that plan, knowing you'd actually crash on the island instead of arriving in LA, and then you'd be forced to raise this baby. So the idea, based on what Charlie's saying, like Charlie's interpretation of events, and again the implication, but based on the psychic's face after she walks away, is that there was no couple. He wanted her to get on this plane so that she would be in a situation where she had to raise the baby.
But then she was with the couple.
No. So yeah, you're misremembering. So he's trying to talk her. She's giving up the baby for adoption. That agency or that lawyer, or however she got hooked up with those people, that's who she was going to give it away to. He's telling her, no, don't do that.
Yes, my bad.
And then when the pin doesn't work, she's like, okay, I can't do this. She goes to see the psychic. The psychic tells her about this other couple in Los Angeles.
That's right.
Yeah, that was an Australian couple.
And that's right. Yes. And so there is no.
There's no couple in Los Angeles.
There's no couple in Los Angeles. Yes.
Yeah. So with all that in mind about the psychic, I'm trying to think if
now I've completely ruined your
train
of thought.
I'm trying to think if because I know there's a lot I want to say in my spoiler commentary about it. I'm trying to think if there's stuff that we can talk about as somebody that doesn't really remember. Well, yeah, I'm trying to think of questions to ask you, and I guess a good one would be like, what do you imagine he's seeing about the future that like you have to raise this baby? Like, what goes through your head?
Man, I don't even know if I can say what came across my mind because as soon as he started that, of course, I was like, oh my gosh, what do you see? And then I'm like, well, I mean, I know a little bit about what he must have seen, but I'm trying to go, well, is the plane crash the thing that he saw? Clearly that's not it, because
then later he's counting on
yes,
that.
Yeah. And so, I frankly didn't know how to feel, because my mind started going to future episodes where I think we've talked offline about some things I think might be going on with the island, and so it kind of went there, and but it's just too much. It hurts my brain too much, because I'm just like, well, there's so much to be bridged in between what might be this thought process way out here in the ether and what's going on in this one episode.
Well, to kind of take what you're trying to hint at in talking about it in a way that's relevant to just this episode. What's interesting is that the psychic seems to have been able to foresee the crash, and he's insistent that she raise the baby, and that the baby's in danger if she doesn't do that. Taking that in the context of what is happening on island in this episode, it seems that Claire's in some kind of danger by this person who wasn't on the plane,
right?
Who therefore is who seems to be a very real threat to Claire, and wouldn't have been if she hadn't crashed on that island.
Right.
So, like, did the psychic just not see that? Or, what's the deal with that?
Hiccup, yeah. It's very interesting. Well, and I don't even want to speculate, because there's like 50 different ways you can even go with that. But, knowing or half remembering what I might remember.
Right.
But yeah, I found the whole episode in that sense still super interesting, because I'd forgotten so much. I got to relive a larger portion of that little surprise. So
it's another one of my favorite episodes, just because like every part of it I find compelling. The flashbacks, they're just so interesting. What's happening on the island is like, what is going, like, who's doing
is
this
it real?
thing?
Is she really dreaming?
And then well, and this is a good way to, because I was wondering, last week you saw Ethan for the first time, and you said, I think I did such a good job with my poker face. You were like, I didn't remember why, but when I saw Ethan, like, I knew I didn't like the guy, and I was like, oh, okay.
There's nothing wrong with Ethan. He's picking up firewood.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, did at some point, like when Hurley's taking the census and he's talking to Ethan, did you at least register that he was the one attacking her?
No, I honestly didn't. Matter of fact, let's just go with the manifest. Hurley's doing his census thing. I don't really recall that. I remember having a certain feeling about Sawyer. Gave that up to him like pretty easy
for Sawyer.
Yeah, for Sawyer, right? But then I also I thought to myself, I had a bunch of thoughts like right in that scene. But I'm thinking like, oh, it's Hurley's approach. He's pretty self-effacing. He's funny.
Yeah.
And even when he's insulting, if you will, it's humorous, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh man, so that's how you approach Sawyer. Sawyer seemed to appreciate that and be like, yeah, all right, big guy, go for it. And so all that to say, he gets the manifest, and I didn't think anything of it until towards the end of the episode. Well. Yeah. I think it's safe to say till the end of the episode. I did get a weird vibe when Hurley, they encounter him, and Hurley's telling him he needs to go get. I'm sorry, Charlie is telling him, hey, you need to go get Jack. Claire's going into labor or whatever.
Yeah.
And I felt a way about that.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I thought based on you getting, like, I don't like that guy.
Yeah.
Based on you getting that from last week, I thought you might remember things or piece together something early on this one.
Still Mike here.
I really enjoy Hurley going around taking like all of those scenes. I find really humorous. Like Shannon's, I am so not moving to the rape cage.
Yeah.
Were you able to hear? Because it's tough to hear depending on what you're watching on and stuff. When Hurley's talking to Locke, and Locke does that thing that we talked about a minute ago, where he's like, "No, it found me."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay." And then he walks off and he starts talking to the lady that was walking by. Did you hear what he said?
What
Hurley said to the lady after he walks away from Locke and starts walking with her?
I distinctly remember him speaking to the lady, but I don't know I don't remember.
So he walks up to her. I'm not gonna be able to do this. It's funny, but yeah, like and you could faintly hear him say, I know I already talked to you, but I'm just trying to get away from that guy.
It was also Locke that asked him, "Well,
Yeah,
who's checking on you?"
yeah,
or something like that. And he's like,
me. Okay, so, and I know you vaguely remember certain things about the direction of this plot, but I mean, any non-spoilery vibes on what Ethan's deal is, because he yeah, because I know you kind of remember certain things. So it's like I shouldn't ask that.
Well, don't give me too much credit because it's kind of like infiltration 101. Like that's all I concentrated on as soon as I remembered that is like, well, duh. I mean, you could do so much recon of these people, these new people on the island if you're already there. You could do so much, recon, and then you have to stay hidden and you have to do whatever. But it's like it's better than the old Trojan horse. It's like, oh, I'll get in there probably the first night. I don't recall if it's revealed. Embeds himself. Now they think he's one of the survivors as well, and now he's got all this intel.
Yeah.
And he needs no excuse to run off into the woods. Comes back with firewood or whatever every time he comes back, right? And nobody's like, wait, that guy's been gone a while. Like, nah, nobody cares, right? So he can go back. He can tell his camp, this is what I found out, blah blah blah. And so I concentrated on the psychology and the strategy of that probably more than I concentrate on some things that I should have to kind of get to the bottom.
Again, I can't talk too in depth with this because of spoilers, but like I feel a very similar way that like a lot of people that have seen the entire series like question like why do that, and I'm like, you're really missing why that actually would be a really good idea.
That is the thing to do in that
situation. I'm saying, if you are a group of people, which maybe Ethan is or isn't. Again, I'm maybe combining things that aren't meant to be combined, but you have the others that Russo says there. Saeed hears the whispers and combines that with what Russo said, and then tells Jack, we're not alone.
Yep.
Right after that, it's revealed, oh, this guy wasn't on the plane. To me, you put these pieces together, it seems like the show's suggesting that there is a group of people on the island, and that Ethan is not alone. That is yet to be revealed, so I'm not. Maybe that's not the case, but if you were a group of people on this island and suddenly this plane crashes and there's all these newcomers and you don't know if they could be a threat or there's so many factors, and why it might be a good idea to learn who these people are and understand whether or not they're a threat or how threatened you should be by them. It makes a lot of sense. I feel like not a lot of people appreciate that. So I like that you're already appreciating it in just the one episode where it's revealed that this has been happening. But then you add in the Claire of it. Like, why the fuck is this guy fucking with the pregnant lady then? But because that's at this stage, that's a lot less clear. Like what is the strategic move there? Like, why are you doing something with her? Yeah.
Well, that's a. I mean, again, I've got a very
vague memory.
Well, no memory, just a population theory on that, right?
Oh, okay.
It's like if this were a real thing, and we know we're not, we've been there, our group's been there, we know we're not getting off the island. What do you need? What do you need for sustainability? Well, you need childbirth. You need women for sure. Doesn't hurt to have some young men if you can indoctrinate them to do the chores as the elderly. Like, you're literally building your own little civilization there. You need youth. You need some baby makers. You need some stuff. So and again, getting just way down. I don't know, topsoilish with it, I guess. But it made me think that way, that they're just like, oh, okay, we get youth, and maybe we could have this breeder, for lack of better terms.
Well, I'm wondering if on a conscious level or a subconscious level, maybe what Rousseau revealed at the end of last week might be factoring into that interpretation at all. You remember, she keeps asking about Alex. Where is Alex? Thinking Saeed is one of these others.
Yes, that took her child.
Well, as I say, then by the end she reveals that Alex was her child. So the implication seems to be she believes the others have her child.
Yes.
So taking that with Claire being pregnant with a child.
Alex needs a bride. They're hoping for a girl.
There you go.
Well, we figured this out. Well, this podcast is over. We're not going to watch anymore.
But yeah, so I mean that would insinuate though that this group is very small if they're needing other people to
yeah.
to populate. So I just have a couple more things that we haven't quite talked about yet. Let's start with the dream at the very beginning of the episode. Claire's little creepy dream. Any thoughts or feelings on that?
Yeah, the whole thing just kind of creeped me out. Like her getting up, hearing the baby crying. I distinctly remember not wanting her to go to the woods selfishly. Like, yeah, don't go in there. I had no recollection of what was going to happen. And then she encounters, creepy Locke out there being locked, but worse somehow.
Well, he was at the psychic table, which you wouldn't have realized at the time. And then I did want to point out that he had one white eye, one black eye, which is the imagery that we've seen.
Oh, and Adam and Eve, the stones.
Yeah.
See, things like that, it didn't occur to me at the time, but now that you say it, it does.
Yeah. It's interesting that she has that dream, and that creepy dream, and that's how the episode starts, and then all this other creepy stuff
starts coming to fruition.
Yeah.
It did make me wonder if it was more of a premonition than a dream. Hope not.
And then I did say I wanted to go back to the pens thing at the office. How did you like that scene?
I liked it because it seemed like destiny. It's a coincidence that one pen doesn't work, right? But then they're all watching her with this, like, all we need is a signature, and then the attorney who's got the nice pen gives her his pen, and then it doesn't work, and like he gets weirded out by that, like, probably been right with that thing all day. And then there's a third pen handed to her, and I can't remember now whether that pen didn't work or she started to sign and then just bailed, but it was enough that that's all she needed. And I remember thinking, like, did she sense that it wasn't supposed to happen? Or did it just take long enough for her remorse to build up enough to say no? But I looked at that 100% as like, oh man, if that ain't the sign from God you needed, that you're supposed to not sign that child over.
What I really like about it, and you touched on it there, is it makes sense that she reads it that way. It sounds like you read it that way. But yeah, I'm glad you kind of noticed. Like, you weren't 100% sure, but you did kind of notice she only actually tries to use 2 pens. And it's not that outlandish or weird. I don't know about you. I've been in plenty of situations where I've tried to use 2 pins back to back, and they didn't work. So it's not.
I also stopped signing what I was signing.
Yeah, right away. I'm not tipping you anymore.
You're not supposed to have a tip.
So, but my point is that, like, there's a perfectly that's not that fantastic of a thing to happen. And it goes back to what I was saying, where I think Malkin was hitting on, that part of her that doesn't want, isn't excited about the idea of giving this baby up, and that was all it took. She's the type of person that believes in astrology, that believes in psychics to at least some degree. Like it makes sense that she would read that situation that way. And I'm not even saying that it's wrong, by the way.
Right.
I'm just saying what I like about it is they leave you with enough that it could just be a perfectly normal thing that happened.
A little mystery inside a mystery they didn't even have to give you.
I hesitate to use the word mystery. I mean, it's no more a mystery than, like, is there some significance behind anything, any mundane thing that happens to us in our real lives? So yeah, I just really like it because it works on both of those levels. And to me, it makes it more, the fact that it could have just been a perfectly ordinary mundane thing makes it more meaningful that she read it that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It gives you a deeper dive into her psyche and her thought process, for sure. And like you said, what you've been saying through the entire episode is the influence that he had on her, and even when she's seemingly done with him or what he wants, she can't escape the fact that some things he said to her is still affecting her decision making.
The chain of events of the psychic was, the psychic, when she first comes, he senses that she's pregnant, or he says, like, oh, you're pregnant, and Claire doesn't seem to have told anybody besides her friend who she's come with. he senses that she's pregnant. She's surprised by that, and then he stops the reading. He gives her, I think he gives her money back in that first time, and sends her away. Then she's the one that seeks him out months later after Thomas has left her, and he agrees to do the reading. Somewhat, he doesn't seem that reluctant, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But he agrees to do the reading, and then that's where he's like, okay, this is what I can tell you. You gotta, and he starts like obsessing over that. Again, I don't necessarily expect you to have anything to say. Like, I just wanted to recap those events and see if like maybe you thought any kind of way about it.
Yeah, I think like when you talk about his when she comes back the second time, it almost seemed to me like he didn't want anything to do with it, but now his morbid curiosity's got the best of him, and he can't not. Mm-hmm. And then once he does, he gets this feeling that he's supposed to control this, like he's supposed to make sure she has the answer to this thing, and evidenced then by the fact that he starts bugging her ad nauseum to do what it is that he senses she's supposed to do.
Yeah.
So now let's get back to the rest of Ben's video, the other two questions that he had for us. Before we get into those, I want to once again remind everybody that if you too would like to send in a video message or an audio message or even just a written message, you can do that by emailing us at dr.candlepun@gmail.com, or if you are experiencing this podcast on YouTube, you can leave a comment on that video and we can get you included in that way. Yeah, without further ado, let's get back to Ben.
Firstly, I'm just wondering how you're finding the weekly schedule, whether Mike, as a second-time viewer, I believe, whether you're whether you're still getting that feeling of the excruciating cliffhangers, whether that's happening yet, whether you remember enough stuff that you're not really too worried about it, or whether you're really kind of, every time an episode finishes, you're itching to hit that play next episode button. I remember that was something I struggled with when I got to season 3, and just because of how British telly worked and stuff at the time, I was having to wait for the DVD releases to watch it first time. So the first time I watched season 3 was on DVD, and it was incredibly difficult to make myself not just watch episode after episode and just binge the whole thing until I was kind of not appreciating it anymore, and I was just I always had to force myself to stop at a point where I was itching to get back to it, rather than a point where I was like, okay, I'm a bit bored now, or I was taking twists for granted, or I was falling asleep halfway through an episode. So just wondering how that's how you're finding that, and also whether maybe Chris, whether it's nice to get back to being in like the weekly enforced schedule. I'm after kind of doing 3 at a time in a week, or maybe when you're doing a personal rewatch, you're just kind of binging the whole thing in a week. I know I've done that occasionally. So just wondering how you're both finding that.
I'll let you answer it first.
All right. Well, I love it. So, and it's kind of a mixed bag for me. So again, I think we mentioned it, or maybe we didn't, but I retired from my career. 2 days later, my wife and I started a company. She started a full-time job 2 weeks later. I started another career 2 weeks later. I just started another career, going on my second year now. So I for a lack of better terms, I'm forcing in this one episode a week and forcing in the opportunity to sit here and do the podcast about it. So I don't,
which I appreciate. I'm sure.
No, and it's great. It's awesome thing to do. But with my schedule, I don't get the benefit, I think, of what I had 20 years ago, where I'm sitting there like hanging on, right? But at the same time, I have had what Ben's talking about, where I'll finish an episode, something's revealed to me that I forgot about, and I'm like
I'm thinking this one.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe I should just watch another one, even if I have to rewatch it, because I want to see where this is going. So, and on that kind of that American side of things, because Ben brings up, Telly across the pond and the way that they did things. I go back to Netflix. Like I had Netflix when I was still doing my first career. I couldn't tell you if I watched 5 things on Netflix the first handful of years I had it. When I retired and I found, I'll just say Stranger Things was like probably one of the first things I watched. Man, I learned what binge watching was, and I took it for granted. And now I'm back to I don't have time for that. So I'm in that nice little mix where I'm not getting the cliffhangers feelings that I did 20 years ago, but I'm not without them completely because of my busy schedule. So it's kind of a political kind of answer, Ben, but it's real.
Yeah. Well, so to answer the part addressed towards me, because this is the first time. It would be the first time since 20 years ago that I'm watching at a weekly rate. And funnily enough, I don't know that I ever watched season 1 at a weekly rate because as we've talked about, like I didn't really start following the show like week to week until season 2. So I think this is the first time that I'm watching it at this rate. It's another thing that's come up recently in our first time viewer discussions is it has started to make me appreciate certain things that I never appreciated before, such as it always felt to me that Hurley was very much a big part of these early episodes. But and then the last 2 that we've watched, I'd say that he has been, the one we're talking about today and last week's, where he does the golf course. But the 4 or 5 weeks before that, I'm sitting there every week, like, wow, Hurley really wasn't in the show very much for a while.
Not really heavy.
Yeah, and I never appreciated that before. So I'm sure there's been other things too. For some reason, because it came up recently, that's the one that I'm thinking of. The thing that I noticed.
I'm just going to comment on the fact that like how he split that question to both of us, knowing how what you've done in the past versus what I've done, and I love the question in the sense of I've thought about it, but I don't think I've ever said anything to you or asked about it. Like is there ever a point where you're just like, man, I know this episode like the back of my hand, so you don't find any interest in it. But I think I answer my own question with some of the discussions that we've had, and obviously we'll continue to have, is when you're really into something to this level, you can find something new. You can find something new that you might not have seen the first 19 times you watched that episode or whatever. And I'm finding it. It's my second time with 20 years in between. So
yeah. It's funny because if I were only ever watching the show by myself, I think I would. I think I would feel that way about most of the show. Like, I don't really feel the need to. That's the thing. I don't really rewatch it by myself anymore. I usually, like, if I want to rewatch it, I usually have to find people.
Bring somebody in.
Yeah. Anyway, because my point is like my experience watching these episodes is always in some way new because of who I'm watching it with. Yeah. So this group of first-time viewers that were watching it and hearing them react in their own unique ways that other people haven't reacted, or engaging with it in ways that maybe I haven't experienced before, and then talking about it afterwards, and then saying things that I haven't heard said before. It really is a very different experience each time. I'd say the most tedious experience I've had watching this show has been taking the notes, and it's purely because I am watching it more clinically. Like, okay, maybe we can talk about this, and maybe I'll try and remember to say this about this, and that's the most tedious it's been. But like in a way that I'm not particularly enjoying it, but I'm not like dreading it either.
Right? Yeah. It's just more almost like work.
Yeah.
A little bit of a grind.
Yeah.
I started to laugh there only because, and you may want to cut this, but it just reminded me, I was thinking about you and how many times you've watched this with other people. And I think about me really liking a movie and trying to get somebody I like to sit and watch it, and how I'm like looking at them. And I'm not getting the reaction that I was hoping to get. Like, they're not into it as much as I was. And then they're like getting up and going to the bathroom, like, oh, you don't have to pause it. I'm like, I might as well just shut it off and leave the country. I mean, like, why am I even here? And I don't know why that bugs me so bad. But I just 100%. Like, no, like how you don't stand a chance of feeling the way I feel about this if you're so nonchalant about it. Yeah. So,
if you're not willing to engage with it, then yeah, what are we doing here?
Another question regarding this episode and some episodes before it really. In the series, something to think about as you watch the series is the accents, because obviously they're not always going to be able to get Australian actors or Mancunian actors from Manchester in England, things like that. So I'm just wondering how the accents are feeling to you as Americans. I'm wondering if there are any American accents that feel dodgy. If say Charlie's brother rang true to you and the Australian accents. The psychic in this episode is played by Nick Jameson, who, as far as I'm aware, is American. He does voice acting. He played Max in an old video game called Summer Max Hit the Road. He played the Russian ambassador, I think, in 24. And as far as I can tell, to my British ears, his Australian accent is pretty good. And in fact, Charlie's brother's accent, to my non-Mancunian ears, is fairly good. It kind of clunks occasionally, but it's fairly strong, especially compared to the English accents you get in some shows. So yes, just wondering how that stuff is landing with you guys.
Well, again, great question, and it took you such a short period of time there to make me feel so stupid and unworthy, Ben. I'm so simple. I am now going to probably try to get a little into that, because I'll have time where I'm recalling things, and I'll probably try to concentrate on that. I'm such a sucker for accents, especially when I know that it's not somebody's native tongue. It's not their real accent, and they're really doing it. They're really doing it. That I want it so bad, I probably excuse things subconsciously that I would pick up. Yeah, I buy into it because I want to so bad. That's not a great answer, but that's my reality. But man, I dig that question. That's awesome. I'm gonna get into it now.
Well, I mean, the funny thing, like I don't know if this is a very American thing, but I don't feel like I'm a good judge of what's a good. I mean, I feel like a really shitty British accent, I could be like, that's obvious.
Yeah.
But yeah, like at no point. And I'm trying to think ahead a little bit, but obviously this question pertains to what we've seen so far. Yeah, I can't think of a single time where I was like, oh, they're obviously doing an accent. I'm sure at some point I knew that the actor that played the psychic wasn't Australian. I'm sure at some point I heard that. I didn't remember it. I really didn't remember that Liam wasn't British, the actor that plays him. So yeah, no, I've had no issues with the accents. That may just be us not experiencing enough accents in real life. Yeah, so also maybe not the most fascinating question, or maybe that's what he's looking for. Is like, as Americans, like maybe it doesn't bother. Yeah. Well, and then as far as anybody doing an American accent, that I mean, no, as far as I've been able to tell, and as far as I can recall, I haven't noticed anybody where I've been like, oh, they must not actually have an American accent in real life. So I don't know if we just haven't had one yet, or. Yeah, and again, I'm trying to think ahead of like, is there a character later that's supposed to have an American accent?
I think what's funny is it's weird that I wouldn't think of that as much as, like, you know, Caroline and even Juliet points those things out to me when we're watching shows or movies or something, and they're aware of that type of thing. They actually point that out to me, you know, or they'll pull up an interview of somebody who's speaking in their, you know, normal accent when I saw them in a movie and they were supposed to be American, or vice versa. And I'm always fascinated when I see the real versus the acting. 100%. Yeah. I'm always impressed. Just carrying it on for, you know, I know they're not shooting an entire movie or series like nonstop, right? But for hours of filming to get what they need, and they're managing to speak in a way that they have not done their entire life. I do love that.
Well, so now I'm thinking of Rousseau, because I feel like, I know there was like a joke video at one point later on about her accent apparently sounding more Eastern European than French. And it's like even that one, like, I mean, I feel like I'm more familiar with French accents now than I was when I first watched the show. And yeah, I do feel like she doesn't sound like stereotypically French, but it's still just, I mean, because I'm just so used to it, attributing it to her, that it doesn't bother me. So yeah.
Well, now I'm going to ask you. I'll get everybody thinking, because I think there's a name for it. I'm not smart enough to remember what it is, but you know, if you're around somebody who stutters, sometimes you'll take on a slight stutter. You know, the more you're around them. Same thing with accents, that you tend to do that. What I'm wondering with Russo is how long she's been out here by herself now. She's not heard anybody but herself speak it. What does that do to your actual accent, right? Not the same, but I remember moving from the country to the inner city, and people thinking that I sounded so country, and I'm like, I'm not hearing it at all. Like, I don't get it. And then talking to a friend back home and be like, wait, are you doing that on purpose? Like, it's just so different when you get around people who you know, you're not used to being around. You don't hear their accents. So.
Yeah, I don't know how that would work with that, because yeah, I agree. Like, if you're around other people, you kind of adopt those speech patterns. But if you're not around any people, I would think that your accent wouldn't change. Now, crazy tinfoil hat theory. Maybe she's heard so many of those whispers that those of them
they're not whispering in French out there. Good call. she's not completely alone.
Yeah,
got those voices in her head and/or trees. Right.
Okay, so I think I'll end by asking any recollection on where things go from here, given where like this one ended on such a big cliffhanger. Like, do you remember at all what happens next?
I mean, I'm kind of hoping they slit that guy's throat, but I don't think that's how it ends. I don't, though. I found myself, and it's funny because, you know, Ben asked the question about that feeling of like, oh man, I really want to watch the next episode. And I'm sitting here going like, yeah, I don't really get that. But like, this is when I actually did get that, because I'm like, wait a second, like what happens? What happens here? I am a little more anxious to see that next one, but I don't have the slightest clue. Okay. Just nothing's ringing my bell.
Well, all right. So we will be back next week to find out what happens next. For episode 11, it's called All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues.
Oh my goodness. All right, yeah. Yeah, well, I'm glad you didn't ask me to guess that. You could have given me 9 of those 10 words, I wouldn't have got it right.
But yes, we will be back next week for that one.
Hope to see you then.
I would now like to give a special thank you to the currently active donors. These include candidate number 90, Ben Ward, candidate number 108, Jeffrey Winslow, candidate number 69, Brian Phillips, candidate number 32, Chuck Boyd, and candidate number 341, Hans. If you too would like to become a candidate, you can do so for as little as $1. One-time or recurring donations can be set up on Ko-fi.com/Candlepun or Patreon.com/Candlepun. A donation of any amount will get you credited in this podcast and added to the candidate wall, which will be displayed in all video versions of the episodes of this podcast from that point forward, even once you're no longer donating. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the multiple people that have donated equipment and resources that are used in the production of this podcast. These include Mary Mullins, Brandon Huth, Charles Huth, William McMahon, and Charlene McMahon. Until next time, namaste and good luck. His other 2 questions are a bit more ancillary to this episode. I feel like that's such a weird word to use. Right. To like this video, click the thumbs up. Or, if there has been an incursion by the hostiles, click the thumbs down. To leave feedback, enter a comment below. To be notified when more videos arrive, click the circle and then select the notification bell.
To view previous content from this channel, click either of the two boxes.